My guest this week is not surprised by the UN report. In fact, he's not alarmed by the figures because he says it had been long coming. Dr. Godwin Ichimi, a research fellow at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, is an expert on food security. He explains his thoughts further in this interview. Dr. Ichimi, thank you so much for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. Now, these figures released by the United Nations, 20 million people at risk of facing famine around the world, they're not surprising to you because, I mean, this is your field, but they are still alarming, right?
That's correct. First of all, thank you for having me. And yes, to me, they are not surprising at all. As a matter of fact, I think that the figures grossly underestimate the exact situation on ground. It's gratifying to know that the UN is keeping very close tab on the food security situation globally. But the truth of the matter is that hunger has been an endemic reality of the countries that have been mentioned. For several years now, if you take a look at the global mapping of hunger, the countries mentioned are invariably the countries that you will see as the flashpoints of hunger spots across the world. And so, to my mind, I mean, there is nothing particularly surprising about it. And there's also another dimension to this hunger narrative. You see, there has always been this very chronic food insecurity situation with us. Yes,
especially in Africa.
Especially in Africa, and even in a country like Nigeria. There's a phenomenon I always like to tag the silent hunger. The silent hunger situation, exists where people are chronically challenged, in terms of their ability to access food. Okay, their food entitlements is in a very dismal situation. And I think that situation in itself is as serious as the periodic burst of food, of famine and starvation that is flashed up in the media and by international organizations like the United Nations and other donor agencies. So by the time you combine those who are faced with the phenomenon of silent hunger with those whose situation have reached the critical point to so much as to generate the kind of interest that the United Nations is causing to, focus on. Now, the figure will be far much more than what the United Nations is talking about.
But did we, it sounds more like countries are not doing enough to take statistics or to take stock of what is going on. Did we actually need the UN to tell us that, these countries are facing hunger? I mean, they have governments. They also have institutions that are supposed to warn the government of, cases like this. So they didn't have to take the UN to bring this forward to say, this is what you're going through.
I think your question will mean that we would now have to interrogate the political context of the food security situations of nations. For political reasons, no nation would want to be identified as not being capable of addressing what, to my mind, is the #1 security situation for every human being. That is the capacity to access food. Not just food, but culturally and nutritionally suitable food. And you will know, the records are there, that most countries faced with serious food security situations have been in denial over time. Especially in the Lake Chad Basin area. We know for a long time that a country like Niger, for example, will tell you that the famine situation that is being spotlighted in the international media is nothing but outright propaganda to discredit the government. That trend has caught up with the other nations as well. And even in our country, Nigeria, when we begin to talk about food insecurity situation, particularly in the northeast region, the narrative has vacillated from outright denial to ascription to say the generalized insecurity situation in that region. While I will agree that insecurity, insurgency, and other terrorist activities have greatly diminished the capacity to produce food, but this is but only one trigger of the food crisis situation anywhere. Whichever way you look at it, food crisis situations, famine, starvation, in a generalized form, is nothing but a colossal failure of the governance of the food system.
Now, if this is happening,
Yes.
does it mean that we really cannot get out of this situation unless, the political will eventually, does something, politicians eventually do something about it. Or else these areas, as we have mentioned, will continue to be aid dependent. And I think that the international community sort of enjoys it, when countries are coming and begging with cap in hand, asking for aid and so on. They relish it, it seems. They would rather give, drop, bags of food and so on, rather than help with the technological advancements that you're talking about.
I'm actually, beyond relishing it, it is also a survival strategy for them. Do not forget that these politicians that we see on the screens of televisions worldwide, the leaders of these countries also depend for their political survival on critical segments of their society. Large farmers, large agri-businesses, for example. So when they get into office, they have a responsibility to their immediate local domestic constituencies, which means that they must pursue policies nationally and globally that makes it possible for global agri-businesses to thrive. So now looking at the flip side, for third world countries, for African countries to imagine that somebody will be so sympathetic from across the Atlantic, for example, to the extent of helping us articulate our domestic agricultural policies such that we come at par with the farmers in the industrialized world and we can compete with them, it's delusionary. So we need, apart from the political will, and whether they can whip up the political will is another matter entirely. But beyond that, assuming that they can whip up that political will, assuming that we can get a nationalistic political class that is willing to dump its self-serving agenda when they get into governance, assuming we can achieve that, there is also the whole challenge, okay, about articulating the appropriate strategies that will equip the local farmers, that will build capacity of the local farmers, okay, such that they can now compete globally. Now, let's not kid ourselves here. The capacity of our peasant farmers, to compete with global agribusinesses, is very limited, okay? And this is where we require the state to step into the picture. And for me, the continuous pursuit of neoliberal policies, especially in the agricultural sector, will do nothing but continue to promote the kind of situations that will keep us in this beggarly situation.
I would love to have you back on the show, hopefully soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Ichimi.
Thank you
for speaking with me.
Thank you very much.
We heard the speeches this part of the world, but what are women in other parts of the world most concerned about? We'll be reviewing International Women's Day celebrations. Do join us again.